You are listening to Reinvented, and I am your host, Jen Eckhart. If I had to put money on it, I'd guess that 99.9% of my viewers and listeners struggle with some form of stress, anxiety, or depression. Most of us see stress and anxiety as problems to be solved. But my next guest says, hey, it's just Mother Nature's way of giving us the energy boost we need to not only be productive, but be successful. Dr. Chloe Carmichael is a clinical psychologist, a badass, best-selling author of Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety. She has a master's degree and PhD in clinical psychology from Long Island University and a bachelor's degree from Columbia. Wow. Her private practice in New York City focuses on stress management, relationship issues, self-esteem, coaching, you name it. Something we all could use, I think, a little advice in. She's also a consultant at Baker McKenzie, the third largest law firm in the world. She's an advisory board member for Women's Health magazine and a featured expert for Psychology Today. But the coolest part is that her book was endorsed by Deepak Chopra himself. Oh my gosh, that is so cool. Dr. Chloe, welcome to Reinvented.
Thanks, Jen. It's so good to be with you. I've really loved watching your show and, some of the thoughts about mental health. I saw the one you had with, her name was Maura, and she was I think a Miss Colorado and an active duty soldier, and she was on some kind of a task force for mental health.
She's a badass.
That was absolutely amazing.
Full disclosure, I am going to try really hard to not make this interview my own personal therapy session.
I love to chat and hear more. Don't be afraid to open up if you want.
Okay. Well, you said it, so I'm going to do it. On this show, we take a lot of pride in keeping politics out of the discussion, focusing on how to reinvent and better yourself in your career, in your relationship, in your personal life, and in your mind. I often do episodes on how to reinvent one's mental health, which I think a lot of people take for granted. I'm going to be honest here. I've never heard of nervous energy, which I know is often labeled as anxiety, until I picked up a copy of your book. Can you explain to my viewers and listeners, what is nervous energy? And because when you say that it could be a source of productivity and fulfillment, and I'm like, what?
Nervous energy, to your point, is a phrase that I'm using to try to help people to understand the healthy function of anxiety, which is to stimulate preparation behaviors. So as a clinical psychologist, I actually think that there's kind of a lot of money in big pharma or whatever in kind of medicalizing every feeling to the point where people think everything has to be a mental illness. Now, obviously, I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm all for destigmatizing mental health issues. But at the same time, I think sometimes we can go so far that we want to medicalize every issue, including even healthy, normal anxiety. So for instance, say that Maura, your previous guest, was about to rush into active duty. Her body might get a little jazzed with energy. That's actually a healthy thing. And that's part of anxiety. Now, for those of us who are not, thanks to Maura for her service, out there fighting wars, maybe we're just going into, say, a big interview or a big life event, and we get a little surge of adrenaline, and our vision literally becomes more narrow because it's kind of a holdover from Mother Nature that we get in that fight or flight mode sometimes.
Absolutely.
And that can be a good thing, again, if we understand that the constructive way to use that extra energy is to either work on our stressor, or if the stressor is actually over and we're having kind of a residual energy response, then we can just think strategically about where to point that energy, and then maybe do a deliberate calm down technique, which is fine too. But I just want people to know that nervous energy or anxiety, it's not always something to quote, cope with or manage or breathe away. Sometimes it's there as a gift.
Wow. I never really thought about it that way, to be honest with you. You would never correlate or put the term healthy and anxiety in the same sentence. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that we do throw the term anxiety around a lot and overuse it and possibly even misdiagnose it. And it's super frustrating for people like me who genuinely struggle with it. I am curious, what is the difference between stress and anxiety?
Stress, by the way, is another actually healthy thing, right? So
Really?
stress, yes,
Please enlighten
absolutely.
me and my viewers
Yeah.
and listeners.
Okay. So, for example, when you go to the gym and you lift heavy weights to try to grow your muscles, you're stressing your muscles. If you never stress your muscles, they will atrophy and, like they will feel like they're not needed and they will go soft. So, if you like to say, bungee jump, or, suppose that you go to a networking event and you challenge yourself to meet 5 new people. You're stressing yourself, but it's actually in a good way. So again, I think what people confuse healthy stress with, and by the way, there's even something called eustress. It's eustress with the same root word as euphoria. It's actually the stress that we experience over positive things, like you're getting married, you're having whatever, and it's good news, but you still feel exhausted just like processing it. So
Right.
with stress
Okay.
does come a need, for some recuperation, for some sleep, for all that stuff. And when people don't get that, then they get overstressed. And maybe sometimes people confuse stress with being, overstressed or depleted. But to your question about the difference between stress and anxiety, I think I just described what stress is. But then anxiety, I think of as kind of a concern that you don't have the tools to cope with the stressor. And sometimes that's actually a healthy awareness that is
Hmm.
stimulating you to develop some skills, to talk to your support network, to do some preparation, whatever, so that you can augment yourself and be ready for the stressor. So that's why I say it's not always a bad thing.
That makes so much sense when you put it that way. If you are a high functioning person,
A lot of people are surprised to know that they are high functioning. So in psychology, a high functioning person is really just kind of someone who can take care of their own food, clothing, and shelter. And again, if you were, say, living in a famine situation, it would be different. It accounts for different factors about what's going on in your life. But in general, so, you can support yourself, sustain yourself on a basic level. You're not repeatedly hospitalized for, harm to self or others. You're not repeatedly and frequently, you know, um, struggling with those types of things of harming yourself or other people. Maybe you at least have a couple of basic friendships. In psychology world, that's actually considered high functioning. So I want your listeners to know
wow.
that,
So
yeah,
basically, if you're like eating, sleeping, and breathing and sleeping,
setting an
and
alarm clock and going to a job in the
you're
morning.
high,
And again,
you're considered high functioning.
yeah, but what's interesting is a lot of high functioning people think that that's basic and they think that that's what everybody does because they tend to cluster together and they, like me, I have a PhD in clinical psychology, as you said. So I've been in psychiatric emergency rooms, working, in psychiatric emergency rooms, working on inpatient units, working at what's called partial hospitalization programs. If people only knew like how uncommon it is to actually be doing all these things, that you're talking about, even like say a housewife, a soccer mom, she's running her household. She doesn't realize it, but she is in psychology worlds considered a high functioning person.
Is that
So
like a compliment, or is should people like wear that as a badge of honor, or is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That
Or
that's a good question. What it is to me as a clinician is it's a fact. Like we actually
okay,
measure and assess somebody's functioning, and we're asking questions like, you know, um, have you recently had issues, thoughts of harm to self or others? Do is the person wearing clean clothes? Have they showered this week? You know what I mean? Like, so
right.
it's just basic things that to us we're just assessing.
You personally reinvented yourself as a former yoga instructor turned college professor turned best-selling author. You're also a mom, which I think is amazing. And for people who are generally unhappy and feel stuck in a job they don't love or a relationship that doesn't fulfill them, I really would love to know, just sort of going back to the central theme of this podcast, which is reinvention. Coming from someone like you, is it possible for someone to totally reinvent themselves from the inside out and sort of do that 180 in life?
Yes, you can reinvent yourself. And I don't even think of it necessarily about like sometimes if people think reinvention, they think like, oh, you're discarding or disowning what was there before. And that's not necessarily true. Sometimes you're just building it to a new level. So, I mean, in my case, sometimes people say, oh, PhD, Columbia University, and they think of me as an academic person. Fair enough. I haven't published in academic press and those kinds of things. And I was a college professor, but I didn't finish college till I was 29. I had a
Wow.
GED when I was a teenager. So yes, I share that because I do want people to know, yes, you can absolutely change and grow and you can and you should. And there's different unconventional paths. Like as you alluded to, I was a yoga teacher, which was great. And I loved it and I enjoy it. And I share mindfulness techniques in my book. Which, it's funny you mentioned that a person wouldn't necessarily put anxiety and healthy in the same sentence because I actually did reserve the domain anxietyishealthy.com, and
There
it
you
will point
go.
people to the page of my book if they're curious about it. But anyway, I do share some of the yoga stuff there. And so I was a yoga teacher. That's how I was paying the bills, living in New York City as a young person. And I was enjoying it. But then through my work with yoga and doing individual lessons, because that was the best way to pay the bills, is you would make the most money on individual lessons. And the people who could pay for those were often very high functioning people. And they were interested in combining the physical poses with the mental goals that they had. And I got really into that work with them. And that was what inspired me to finally say, okay, maybe there is a good reason for me to finish college and get a PhD and become a clinical psychologist. That was like the whole reason for it, because I was very interested in that work. So, yes, I just want to share that as an example of reinvention, but also building on what was there before.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's why people tune into this show to hear stories like that and to know that it's never too late in life to achieve your goals. I consulted with some of my friends on which subject matters they would love to know and ask you about. So I was surprised that a lot of them said the same thing. They all were in agreement and said how to cut off toxic family members, which I thought was really interesting. There was an article in Newsweek recently entitled "Mom Slammed for Not Wanting Daughter to Cut Sister Off Out of Her Wedding and Life." The mom didn't want to choose between her daughters, and basically she was dragged for doing exactly that by taking sides in a long-standing feud between them. You laid out 3 ways to handle a toxic family member in that article.
I think some people might do better to say, how do I set limits with somebody
Boundaries.
that feels toxic, and we can get stuck in this word toxic, like what does that really mean? It can sometimes be someone that like you find hard to tolerate. So anyway, I think I look at cutting off, if we also think about that word, what that means as a true last resort. Like somebody has to be, in my opinion, pretty awful as a family member when you say cut off, meaning like I won't go to a Christmas party where that person is or whatever. Um, but anyways, the steps that I kind of like to think about are ways that you can first try to set a limit with the person in a bridge building way. So suppose it's like the proverbial, relative that's always asking intrusive questions about when you're going to have a baby, right? You would respond to that by saying something like, Aunt so and so or mom or whatever. Um, I really appreciate that you're asking this, because you care about me and you want the family to grow, and I know you're coming from a good place. But I just want you to know it's just not a topic I'm comfortable with right now, and I know that that can be hard for you to understand. I'm not trying to push you away, but to
Mm.
be honest, it's just not a topic I want to talk about. But I would like to know, how's your girls' trip that you're planning to, Daytona Beach in the spring or whatever. And so what you're doing there is you're not making the person the bad guy. You're showing some empathy. You're not being in black and white thinking by saying like, you terrible person for asking me this question.
Right.
And then you're also giving them a graceful off ramp. Like you're offering to change the subject and you're showing some personal interest in
I
them.
love that.
Now,
What a great
yeah.
tactic.
But if the person then like won't let it go and like they bring it up again, like I advocate kind of a stair stepper approach where, that time, okay, like it's been said before. So, but still with love and compassion, with a bit of a chuckle, you can say, Aunt so and so, I know it's a habit, but not talking about that. Remember, and tell me again, about your trip to Daytona Beach, and
Right.
you kind of give them like a, you know what I mean. We've all said things sometimes
Right.
that we're just like, whoops, just show a little grace and try to
That's
move
kind of
on.
like a psychology hack, Like,
Yeah,
I like that though.
and if the person does it again, just chasing you around that Christmas party, you know,
When are
hounded
you
you.
freezing your eggs? When are
Yeah,
you having kids?
exactly. I froze my eggs, by the way, when I was 29. It was a good decision, I think, for me, because I didn't end up having a baby till much later. But anyway, so if the person follows you around, you can, and on third strike here, you can say, look, I really am not up for this. I've tried to say this a couple times. I'm going to have to kind of just excuse myself if this continues. Other strategies are, and I talk about this a little bit in my book as well, is that the beauty of a pattern, even though it's frustrating, somebody who always does something. The beauty of it is the silver lining is that we can predict it. And so we can prepare for it. And so you can also, think about at that family gathering or whatever, having an ally that, you're like, hey, look, my secret signal to my husband, if I'm doing this with
Right.
my neck, it means I need you by my side, telling that family member, like, yeah, we're not talking about that right now or whatever. So anyway, there's a lot of
Another
different ways
great
to do
tip.
it,
That's
but
awesome. Hey,
yeah,
if I flip my hair, you need to come save me from Uncle
secret
Joe.
signal. Yeah.
Right. I love that. I found in a lot of family relationships, there are some topics of discussions that are like sort of no go zones, meaning like a lot of people have to walk on eggshells around certain siblings or parents. How do you navigate situations where families are catering to one sibling over another, whether it's like dinner times, kid schedules, holidays? I mean, doesn't there come a point in time where the situation just sort of explodes under pressure? What is your advice to parents to help navigate that situation where they feel put in a situation where they have to sort of choose one child over the other?
They should not be in that situation. And if they are in that situation, obviously I don't know the details of the situation, but I would say in general, I encourage people to be able to take ownership of whatever role they may have in creating the situation, right?
Mm,
So if it's a situation where, like, say I have two adult daughters and the first one tells me they're going to be celebrating their son's birthday party on Saturday, December 4th, and then the everybody in the family knows this. And then the
right.
second daughter says, you know what, we're doing our son's christening on Saturday, December 4th. And then mom says, oh no, I'm in this position where I have to choose between these two events. And they put me in this impossible position. I would say, well, maybe mom's just not setting clear boundaries with people, which is like, the first seat that's reserved, like we all honor that date, right? So
Right.
without knowing the specifics of a situation, it's hard to say, but whenever somebody feels caught between two people,
Hmm.
I always say, well, isn't there some way, again, the beauty of a persistent problem being at least that it's predictable. Can you look at something about the pattern of the problem and figure out a boundary in general that you can articulate, like that would stop it? Because it just seems like there's always some boundary setting issue that can usually happen in families that can help with those problems.
You can't force someone into therapy if they are not willing and ready to accept the help that they need. I'm sure you've heard the saying, people are in therapy to deal with people who refuse to go to therapy. I found that very true in my life. How do you go about helping someone you love receive the help that they need?
If somebody had, say, an alcoholic brother and they needed him to, go to therapy and deal with
Right.
that, and it was not only becoming a problem for the siblings just out of their care and concern for their brother, but because also their brother was, showing up on their lawn drunk in the middle of the night and, making demands for bail money and, just all kinds of things. What I would say that the siblings should do is obviously have a heartfelt talk with brother about encouraging him to go, but also saying, we're not going to be codependent. And we think that, your demands on us, like showing up in the middle of the night and all this stuff, we're going to start calling the police on you because it's not
Wow.
appropriate. We're telling you that 2 in the morning, repeatedly ringing our doorbell, yelling our names to the point where we're getting dirty looks from the neighbors the next day. Next time that happens, we're calling the police, right? Just so you know. So setting limits with people
So sort of
on a
having that tough love approach.
yeah, because honestly, people just and I actually see this too with parents and adult children sometimes too in terms of money. So and it doesn't have to be about, calling the police, even though again, sometimes you're enabling people by you taking the heat for their 2 a.m. drunk and disorderly on your front doorstep without,
Right.
you calling the police. You're not helping them. You're actually enabling them. And I
Wow.
say the same thing, like say to parents that, keep spotting their children
Coddling.
thousands of dollars, say
Right.
for a Manhattan apartment, instead of just saying, you know what, Junior, maybe, you
Junior.
need to live in Queens,
Right.
or whatever it
Have a
may be.
roommate. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And it's helpful to the child to actually start to take ownership of their responsibility, even though it's not always easy for the adult in that or for the parent in that situation.
You had an interesting social media post the other day on Instagram. You wrote, quote, "Be sure to celebrate your victories. A lot of high achievers feel like getting a promotion or doing well on a test or keeping your house looking great is just what you're supposed to do." I deeply resonated with that because some days I celebrate being super productive, going to the gym, getting everything done on my list, recording a new podcast episode. I consider even this a victory, sending emails, I mean, going to appointments. And then other days, I consider it a victory just getting out of bed in the morning or washing my hair. I'm curious, what is the psychology, Dr. Chloe, behind celebrating victories, both big and small?
Yes, great question. I'm so glad that you liked the post. And yes, I mean, you say that in like a self-disparaging way, Jen. You're like, oh, I consider even this a victory, like doing this podcast. I would say,
It's
yes,
the
Jen, it
perfectionist in
is.
me. I'm always have to be, it's the need to stay busy, I think, which
Mhm.
is really ingrained in our society.
Yeah. Well, so that's an interesting point. Okay, so being a perfectionist and how that figures into the need to celebrate your victories. So perfectionism is often marked by, a high awareness of
Oh,
of
I'll say it. Low self-esteem, fear of rejection. Anyway, the list goes on and on.
well, those things are true too. Though what I was just going to say was a high awareness of flaws, and how to fix them.
Very aware.
And if we only focus on the flaws, we experience what psychologists call cognitive dampening, which is where on a cognitive level, we're only aware of the negative information and we actually kind of like numb out or minimize the positive information. That actually leads to depression. One of the hallmarks of depression is a negativity sense, about self-worth and others. It's also a symptom of depression is lethargy, which is a lack of energy because there's a lack of motivation when, you just get sandbagged by all this, negativity and you're not experiencing the hit, the positive thing. Like when rats press levers in cages in psychology experiments, they're doing it for a reward for something that causes dopamine. And so when you celebrate your victory and you say, damn, I did podcast today. Wow,
Right.
I got views, I got likes. I talked to somebody interesting. It went well. That helps to balance out and prevent that cognitive dampening. So that's the psychology explanation for why high achieving people do need to understand the special things that they do and celebrate their victories.
I love that. I will keep that in mind. And whenever I'm in a state, I'll just say I'm in a cognitive dampening phase right now.
Yeah, and the way out of that is to, maybe look at a file of all the recommendation letters that you've ever received, like
Oh,
the
I love
positive
that.
things about you, or like your speaking highlight reel, or just to like don't be afraid to give yourself a boost and to celebrate your milestones, the things you've done already. It's good for you. You don't want to be drunk on yourself or unwilling to notice and celebrate the victories of others, but don't leave yourself out of the mix.
I love that. And I do think that's so important. And that leads me to a tweet of yours that recently went like a little viral, and it was on the importance of open dialogue. Dr. Chloe, when I came forward to the world as a sexual assault survivor, there were a lot of people stunned by my decision to speak up and to stand up for myself. But to this day, yes, it's been the most scary, but it's also been the most rewarding and liberating decision I've ever made. Helping fellow survivors is something I don't take lightly, and I cherish the ability to be able to do that. How can free speech actually benefit your mental health?
Oh, yes. I love that question. Yes, that was exciting. That tweet really did really got a lot of play. I think people are hungry to know like that free speech. And it sounds so obvious to me, honestly, but like free speech is good for your mental health. As a clinical psychologist, open dialogue, freedom of expression, taking what's inside and putting it into words. I don't want to bore people with like a super deep scientific explanation, but evolutionary psychologists have even speculated that part of the reason our society evolved to such a sophisticated species is because of our gift for language, that we can exchange information and ideas and, learn from each other, et cetera. So that's one reason why free speech is good for our mental health. Also, free speech facilitates social support. Social support is a known protective factor in mental health. When we cannot be ourselves and say what we really feel, our social support is degraded because we're
Yep.
not only not really getting close to sharing how we really feel with people, maybe we're even putting on a false front, which can actually hurt self-esteem and hurt social connection. If we say, wow, if people knew how I really felt, they would cancel me. So anyway, I could go on all day about how free speech really does help people to even to actually discard ideas that are what psychologists call maladaptive. So suppose somebody had some stupid, awful, terrible racist ideas. If we don't allow that person to speak and share and say aloud some stuff that is stupid, they don't have the chance to realize sometimes how stupid it is, right? We've all had the experience of, saying something regardless, of politics or anything, of just thinking aloud and saying something and realizing, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Or hearing from our friends and getting new information. When we cut that off, I think it can really have devastating effects on our growth and our mental health and our closeness with others.
Do you think our First Amendment is under attack?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. Yeah, it's really so. I think about say Section 230 and the way that big tech, which has become the public square,
Right.
is somehow operating with the same protection that say AT&T, the phone company, has, where they're not responsible for what somebody says over the telephone, right?
Right.
Big tech operates with the same protections, from what I understand, and yet they're moderating free speech on
Right.
whatever they may call it, whether it's they're concerned about hate speech or they're concerned about disinformation or whatever, or they're concerned about pressure from the FBI or pressure about an advertiser or whatever else, to leave it up to those people to moderate content in what is now the public square, especially protected by Section 230. I think it's very confusing.
That's so insightful. I'm really glad you shared that on this podcast. And again, leaving politics out of it and just talking about one's freedom of expression. Another topic, Dr. Chloe, a lot of my viewers and listeners wanted to know about is, which I know a lot of us can relate to, and even myself, is how to say no without feeling guilty. As a TV journalist, I receive dozens and dozens of pitches in my inbox on a daily basis. Friends ask me for favors. I know that you like speaking gigs. I know you're a speaker as well. And, you know, I know I said I wouldn't turn this into my own personal therapy session, but here we are. Might as well go full throttle. You can invoice me afterwards. I am a programmed people pleaser. And I think I mentioned that earlier in the interview. And I know a lot of people listening to this podcast are as well. As a people pleaser, I have to know, how do you say no without
Mhm.
feeling guilty?
Yes, I'm just making some notes as you talk, because, yeah, that is one of my favorite topics because again, with high achieving people, we're used to being able to say yes, like we can add one more thing. And it's actually sometimes it's a pro-social behavior to say yes. And high functioning people do. Like we like people, we want relationships. And especially in our earlier stages of development, it may have even been more healthy and helpful for us to just have a habit of saying yes to things. I experienced that myself when I first started my practice. I had a motto: I don't say no to work. That
Oh,
worked fine until
wow.
I ended up completely overbooked and in danger of burnout, right? And that was many
Absolutely.
years ago. But, to your point, sometimes it can be helpful when we're learning to say no to mentally reframe and realize that, and I love this quote, it's from Kate Northrup, that every yes is pregnant with a no. Meaning
Oh,
everything that you say yes to means you're going to have to therefore say no to something else. And if you're a qualified, competent person, there's going to reach a point in your life where there's a tipping point and you really do have to start becoming more discerning. Now it can be hard, like you said, for people pleasers, because we want to help people. We feel
right. How
bad
do you
disappointing them.
unlearn that?
Yeah. So one, I have a few tips specifically. One is to do what psychologists call to narrate your experience, which means that you say with your mouth what's going on the inside. So you say to the person, I would really like to say yes to you. There's a lot that's compelling about what you're saying. Unfortunately, I have to say no because I have, a lot of obligations right now and I just cannot fit it in. But I just want you to know I really wish I could say yes. Another thing to do is to buy yourself some time because a lot of those yeses come when we're feeling pressured or
Right.
impulsive or ironically so busy and
Emotion
stressed that
based.
we don't have time to formulate a graceful no. So we can also just simply learn how to say, let me consider that for a bit. I have a few other balls in the air right now. Let me get back to you tomorrow about that.
I like
So
that.
that's another thing that you can do. And also to remember that you're really not doing anybody any favors by committing to something that you cannot give your all to. So you can also tell somebody, I'd love to do it, but I really wouldn't be helping you or doing you a favor with that because I really don't, have the bandwidth for it right now. And I would be doing you a disservice if I said yes, because the truth is, as much as I would love to, I'm a little overcommitted already.
I love that. And I feel accomplished. Like I should give myself a pat on the back because I actually did that recently. I said, listen, whatever I do like to give my 100% my all and devote all of my efforts and energies and attention to that specific project. But I had to decline somebody because I just don't have the capacity in me. I don't have the
Mhm.
bandwidth. So that's really interesting. You know,
Another thing, one more thing that people can do is it can be a great opportunity to connect, right? For others to say, like, no, I'm sorry, I cannot speak at your event. I'm so sorry. But I do know somebody that, like maybe you have a friend that like they're a little bit earlier in their career and you can connect people.
I love that. Great advice. You mentioned burnout, whether you're in your field of psychology or in my field of journalism or finance, real estate, if you practice law, whatever you do, you will inevitably at some point experience some form of burnout in your career. You always hear people say, work hard, play hard, but is that toxic ideology? I mean, people go so hard for so long and then don't have the willpower to like refill their empty tanks. I've noticed this is particularly prevalent for people who leave corporate America because they're like so used to the daily grind. What advice can you give to people on how to reduce burnout?
hmm So again, I have to say, hashtag work hard, play hard is actually one of my favorites.
Really? Okay.
Yes. So I do like to work hard and I do like to play hard. But I also think you're right that it can come to burnout if people don't also rest hard.
Mm,
Because I
fair.
also rest hard.
Yes.
I sleep a lot and I also love my downtime. I love getting that just blue space energy sometimes. So I think like to reduce burnout, it's important to make sure that you are getting your rest and make sure that you are getting your downtime. Sometimes also it can be helpful to surround yourself with images reminding yourself why you're doing what you're doing. and to have super long-term calendars. So over here next to me, you can't see them, but I have year-long calendar for this year and next year on the wall. And I have kind of like certain spots mapped out. So if I know I'm in the middle of like, say, like a book launch time, it's like I have a circle around that time and I know to not plan too many other things during that time. And I know to plan a couple days of recharge time after that. So we can be strategic about it. And again, also to keep pictures, say, like of our family or of the house or of our goals or whatever the stuff is that we're working for
I
to
love
remind
that.
ourselves of why we're doing what we're doing.
Like a vision board, like your own personal Pinterest in a way.
Yeah. You know what? I literally did partner with Pinterest, teaching people how to do those long-term goal vision boards. There's some video footage of it. I'll try to get you a link.
I love that. I have my whole wedding planned on Pinterest, as most women I know tend to do. So can't wait to go back to that vision board one day.
I
We'll
saw
see.
your recent vacation photos with
Oh,
what is
yeah.
it? Yeah, they
Thanks.
look very nice.
Thank you very much. Thank you. A lot of people will be shocked hearing this about me, but I'm an introvert, Dr. Chloe. I like to call myself an extroverted introvert, like kind of like fake out. Like you see me hosting this podcast and talking to all sorts of celebrities and public figures and interesting people, but I love my downtime. I love my alone time. And I think it comes from, I used to be the biggest extrovert when I was younger. And I think as you grow older and mature, you just have less, or maybe this is just a trait of living in Manhattan for as long as I have, but you just have less and less tolerance for, fake people, meaningless conversations. I've learned to set boundaries and I've become super picky with where I direct my time and energy. And sometimes my friends even get frustrated with me and they're like, Jen, you need to text back faster. Like you need to get better at texting. And I'm like, my joke is, hey, I'll text you back in 3 to 5 business days.
Yeah.
So, you know, we know nervous energy is a thing, right? Because of your book. But what about social anxiety? Is that a thing?
People who have social anxiety, it may just signify that you have a high level of awareness, of the people around you and that you really desire closeness. And you may have a high level of what psychologists call impression management, which is the thought that you put into thinking about, how you affect others. And again, from an evolutionary standpoint, evolutionary psychology, it's not a bad thing necessarily, right? I mean, if you think about it, somebody who has no social awareness is sometimes,
I know some
not the,
people.
yeah, sometimes those are not, the most fun people to be around. But on the other hand, if sometimes the social anxiety level is rising to a point where you have this extra energy, but you're not sure what to do with it to help you accomplish your goal, which is to make a good impression and make good contacts and have meaningful conversations with people, say at a party or a networking event. One of the things that you can do is to prepare for that by saying to yourself in advance, okay, what are 5 goals that I have for this event? Do I know who's going to be there? Is there anyone in particular I'm trying to have a certain type of conversation with? Or if you're going to, say, a networking or party where you don't know many people, you can say to yourself, even like, what are 5 topics of small talk that I think would be interesting, for this particular group? Even thinking like, what time of year is it? What holidays are coming up?
Oh, I love
Thinking about
that.
the event itself and what
Yeah.
is the name of the group that brought you there, and to talk to people about how they came to be connected with that organization, et cetera. Going back to the idea that the healthy function of anxiety is to stimulate preparation behaviors. We can think about that. Now, if you've done everything to prepare for the event, but you're just still feeling this unnecessary level of anxiety, that could mean a couple of things. One, it could mean maybe you're not giving your body enough chances to move and hit the gym and you just have extra adrenaline circulating that just needs, an outlet. Or
Right.
maybe you need to learn some deliberate relaxation activities, which I do have in my book as well. But I always tell people we don't want to go to that stuff, like just, try to bliss it away or breathe it away without first finding out, is there some healthy behavior that this is stimulating me to do?
This weird, beautiful thing happens as you get older. You stop caring about things or people that would typically get under your skin. You stop being fixated on other people's vacations and other people's achievements, and you start focusing on yourself and your long-term goals and your dreams. And Dr. Chloe, I'm so grateful people like you exist in the world. I feel like, you do need to probably send me an invoice for this therapy session or podcast episode.
Not at all. I'm just going to write down all the wonderful things you said about my book and quote you on them. That was so kind of you.
They are all true, and feel free. And I truly don't know where we would be as a society without our therapists and people like you who are so selfless and help others and our mental health experts. So thank you for coming on the Reinvented podcast, sharing a little bit about yourself and for all of your helpful tips.
Thanks, Jen. And if people do want to know more, they can go to anxietyishealthy.com.
I love that domain. I don't understand it, but I love it. And that's what's going to be so thought-provoking and sexy to people. They're going to be like, what? Huh? I would never think of those two words together. So thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
To all my viewers and listeners, if you haven't picked up a copy of Dr. Chloe Carmichael's book, Nervous Energy, do it now. You won't regret it. As for this podcast, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to Reinvented. That's available wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, iHeartRadio, you name it, it's there. I'm Jen Eckhart. That was Dr. Chloe Carmichael. Thank you for listening.